What's up, everyone, and welcome to ClearTalk. Um, in this video today, this is not something that was like really on my radar to talk about, but it kind of just popped up when I was searching out like um, new stuff for today to try to to find something to talk about. Although I mean, I've got a couple of things to talk about, but like when I was trying to search for stuff, this popped up, and I was like, and it got me down this train of of um of research and uh trying to get, because in one thing led to another, and what I want to do is actually break this down so that people can get a little bit better understanding of why um it is important to that uh the minimum wage. Okay, this is based on the minimum wage, that it needs to be raised. Okay, and why that the current federal minimum wage is not even remotely close to being, even in the argument of whether or not a livable wage is what the minimum wage is supposed to be or not, which seems to always be the argument. How important it is that even the current minimum wage doesn't even come close to being considered a livable wage. Okay. So what we have here is, and what I come across was this article here. This is a Pennsylvania House Republican leader, Jesse Topper. Okay, so he is the House Republican leader in the state of Pennsylvania, in the House Republican House, uh, the House of Representatives in Pennsylvania. Okay, um, so he's not a U.S. He's a local state House representative. Okay, understood. And he made some comments on his House floor, apparently a couple of days ago, that turned some heads, in his being faced with criticism. And this is what he said: Not every not every wage, and please hear me clearly on this, is designed to be a livable wage. Now, I don't know what he was referring to in this particular moment, like what he was addressing, like if it was a question that was brought to him or an issue or a policy, maybe on a state level or something that was being brought to him. I'm not completely sure. But in what I'm going to talk about, it doesn't really matter. The idea has been for a while, especially in the Republican and the GOP, um, and in probably even somewhat in the more right leaning Democrats, or right leaning independents, whatever. Anybody who questions the legitimacy of raising the minimum wage and how it will inherently affect, whatever. The idea, or the argument against the living wage has been, um, very much that the minimum wage is not supposedly a livable wage. Like, it's not meant to be. That's what I often hear from like conservative friends or family, or just people in my area, or whatever the case, or or across the country, whatever the case. That the minimum wage was not meant, when we argue that, a single person working at a job at 7.25 an hour, cannot live on that wage. Even if they are working full time, they cannot live on that wage. Um, in any place in the United States, like they would have to take on multiple jobs, multiple full time jobs, in order to live comfortably, to have a livable income to live, right? but the argument is that, well, the minimum wage is not supposed to be that. The minimum wage is for, like, kids in school that are just trying to make some chump change or blah, blah, blah. That's the reason why your minimum wage jobs are these little, rinky dink, uh, fast food restaurants, or whatever, the little department stores or something like that. And even that, they pay more than minimum wage. So it's very rare nowadays to even find that. They're more or less probably making more like $8 or 8.50 or maybe even 9. So but it doesn't matter. The livable wage is not supposed to, or the minimum wage is not a livable wage, and it never was meant to be. So I got to thinking, okay, let me really educate myself and learn what the purpose originally. Let's go back to the beginning. What was the original purpose of the federal minimum wage? Okay, that's what I thought to myself. And just so that you and what this was kind of come on the heels of was that a couple of days ago, or recently, wildly enough, we had a U.S. Senator, Josh Hawley, teaming up with a Democrat from Vermont, Peter Welsh, to propose a legislation, is the Higher Wages for American Workers Act, that would boost the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. And then on top of that, the rate would increase each year in line with inflation. Now, we'll talk about that here in a second. But because the idea is that the minimum wage has not, been unchanged since 2009. Okay, we've went now 19 years. Wait a minute. I'm sorry, my bad, bad math. 16 years with no change in the minimum wage. Even though there have been people in the Congress that have attempted multiple times to try to have it raised. But literally, there is a tape of this guy saying this, okay, so that you don't think that this is made up.
Not every wage, and please hear me clearly on this, not every wage is designed to be a livable wage.
Okay, so there. He actually, this tape showing true mask off shouldn't be livable wages, okay? So what I did, I have become here recently pretty actually fascinated with ChatGPT. I know I'm a little late to the game on that. I admit. Okay. And in what I've been doing recently, it was just is really just sort of engaging with it to try to see and understand whether or not I felt that it was actually giving me, like rational or accurate um responses to whatever question I was giving it. And I'm getting better and better at asking it questions, and to what specifics like that I need to give in order to get the information that I'm looking for, not to get the answer I'm looking for, but to get the information that I'm looking for. That's a clear difference there. And I have seen so far that on just a basic level, that when you ask it a question, it seems to me to not only like it looks at for multiple sources, upwards of 15, 20 plus sources a lot of times, to gather information about whatever subject you're asking it about, and seems to like bring all that together and give a unbiased uh, consensus around that topic in its reply. Now, if you're just asking it for data, it will just straight out spit data, like, whatever. It takes from all the sources, it spits it by unbiased data right down the middle, and will then also split it up into different parts, like this is what, if we're looking at it from this perspective, this is what's being said. If you're like this, like, it will give even some side stuff, but ultimately in its summary it will give a right down the middle unbiased consensus of information. And then I have also even asked it what its opinion of something is. And even when you ask its own opinion of a subject, it will still first break down all the information details about that subject from all sources. And then even in its own opinion at the end, it will give it will be like, in my opinion or whatever. It still seems to give like a consensus opinion. Like, it gives its own opinion about a consensus of opinions. So it bases its opinion on the opinions of the consensus overall, like an average consensus. So, it's not like at any point have I seen it so far just on a general usage that it tries to go one way or another in any like hard form or something. Like, it's pretty much unbiased down the middle, just giving you data, straight up information. So, just to try to explain or like try to ration the idea behind AI, being some sort of woke one direction or something another direction. Like what, like from my experience so far, it seems to just be pretty much just data driven right down the center. Like, it doesn't really form its own like cognitive opinion like you would get out of a person per se. It's more robotic. Now, I haven't seen where some people have been able to push it like in a direction, like purposefully, taking it like an interrogational style way or whatever, and kind of pushed AI into agreeing to something it otherwise wouldn't agree to, or whatever the case. I've seen that, but it takes multiple steps, like pushing and pushing and pushing it with creative arguments to actually get it to comply, in one direction or another. Like, it takes a lot, um that I myself are probably not intelligible enough to actually make an AI do. But just general questions here. I'm flipping over here. All right. And I've got this expanded as much I think as necessary for you to see. Now, this is how I started this off. When I thought about this, I said, how can I ask or get to an information? I started generally. I was like, what's the original idea behind the federal minimum wage? All right. And it feeds back. The original idea behind the federal wage in the United States was establish a basic standard of living for workers and to protect them from exploitation and poverty wages. Okay. Protect them from poverty wages, especially during economic turndowns. All right. So the federal wage was established in 1938, and that's going to be key here because I asked a lot of questions around 1938 later on through the Fair Labor Standards Act signed by Franklin D. Roosevelt during the Great Depression. Okay. So this was first to prevent exploitation of workers because many workers established in especially in low skill, low bargaining power jobs, were being paid extremely low wages. Okay. So this was all to protect the exploitation of workers, promote economic recovery and stability, more purchasing power for workers, to help boost the economy as well. That's what helped bring us out of the Great Depression, reducing poverty and inequality, set a national standard, so that there was no longer this race to the bottom where employers were constantly trying to compete with each other by cutting wages. Like, that would be the go-to thing in order to compete with each other, would just be to pay their workers less and less and less, not necessarily raise or lower their uh, uh, profit margins or whatever. Encourage fair competition. The first minimum wage was established in 1938, and it was 25 cents per hour, which is about $5 in today's dollar when adjusted for inflation. Okay. All right. And this is an interesting quote here that we will come back to. All right. But first, it says, no business which depends for existence on paying less than living wages. This is Roosevelt, the one who put this into play. No business which depends for existence on paying less than living wages to its workers has any right to continue in this country. No business has any right to continue in this country if it's paying less than living wages to its workers. That was Roosevelt, the one who put this into place. So right there, automatically, your argument that the minimum wage is not supposed to be a living wage is wrong. Full stop. I could end this video right now and I've done answered that question. Okay. But I'm going to continue. So then I thought, okay, well, does adjusting, because I honestly didn't completely, I don't know what all like adjusting for inflation in any scenario, like any cost comparison scenario from one time to another, if it actually include like what all the like data that it includes. Does it include the idea of cost of living and all that kind of stuff, or is it just strictly just this monetary like inflationary basis? And so, and it even told me, great question. Adjusting for inflation are related, but not the same. Okay. So, understanding inflation, what it does, it do tracks the overall change in price for a broad basket of goods, and it's based on the consumer price index. So basically, simply, a dollar in 1980 would buys a lot more than a dollar today. Okay. So we adjust the older dollar to reflect their current values. And it scopes out national average, not region specific. So that, basically that's based on a national average. It's not, to any cost differentials from state to state or whatever the idea. Cost of living, though, reflects how expensive it is to live in a specific region or place or region, including housing, food, transportation, healthcare, like all these expenses. Okay. In other words, stating out like $15 an hour in Mississippi goes further than in South San Francisco. I'm from Mississippi. That's the reason why you'll see a lot of the data. It gives me like comparisons to other places, and then it throws, hey, this is what you are seeing. All right. So yeah, and then I thought to myself, okay, well then 25, and so I thought to myself, because it's when it stated here, up here that 25 cents was equal to $5 today. And I thought, okay, well, that's $5. We're making $7 now, what is the difference? Like, I wanted to see if it would change. If I asked it a specific thing that it already stated to me, would it change its answer? So I said 25 cents in 1938 would equate to what today? And it gave me it gave me a little bit more specific, but it said $5.40 in 2025 dollars. Okay. Then it states, when federal minimum wage was set at $25 an hour in 1938, it had roughly 5 times the purchasing power of a dollar today. In other words, the original minimum wage was arguably more generous in real terms than the current federal wage of $7.25 an hour, which wasn't been raised since 25. And then it even asked me, would you like to see how the minimum wage would look today if it had been tied to inflation, productivity growth, or cost of living? And I thought to myself, that's actually a really good thing. And that actually was somewhere that I was going. So I said, yes, let me know the difference here. So then it broke down. It says, great. Here's a breakdown tied to inflation. The result, 540. This reflects pure inflation from 25 and 38 to 2025. Please note, the current federal minimum wage, $7.25, which is slightly above that, because it hasn't been is slightly above that because it is last raised in 2009 when it outpaced inflation at that moment. Tied to worker productivity results. If we're tied to worker productivity, $23 to $25 an hour. Well, that's interesting. If minimum wage kept up with how much more productive workers have been since 1968, it would be around $23 to $25 an hour. This reflects the idea that as workers produce more value per hour, their wages would rise accordingly. Kind of that idea of paying for your merits, right? The value of your work. Kind of like the idea of, hiring somebody based on their value of work and their value of knowledge and their merits, right? This would be the kind of the other flip side of that, paying you for the value of your work, right? So, yeah, while productivity rose, wages for low income, and keep 1968 in your mind, okay? Now, tied to cost of living. Now, this varies by location clearly. New York City would be $22.70 an hour. San Francisco, $24.60 an hour. Dallas, $18.90 an hour. Mississippi rural, which is where I am, rural Mississippi, $14.50 an hour. That's huge. That's a pretty big difference, right? Because cost of living here is much lower than it is in San Francisco, for instance. These estimates reflect minimum wage needed to afford basic needs like housing, transportation, healthcare without government assistance. Keep that in mind. Cost of living is the minimum hour wage to afford basic needs like housing, food, transportation, and healthcare without government assistance. Now, what party is always pushing to eliminate government assistance? The Republican Party, right? The GOP. They're always pushing for no more government assistance. I mean, look at it right now. They're trying to, or what they've been doing, they're trying to cut all the programs possible, agencies possible that have anything to do with government assistance, if they can possibly do so, or make it harder for you to get your government assistance. Put barriers, all the kind. This is what Republicans all day long, they complain about people who are on government assistance. Well, if you have a problem with government assistance, then what you should be doing is advocating for people to be paid a wage that would prevent them from having to need government assistance. Correct? But yet they're the ones that often advocate to not raise the federal minimum wage. So it gave you a summary, inflation 540, federal minimal actual is 725, productivity base would be 2325, cost of living from 1450 to 25 plus, depending upon location. All right, so then I said, okay, well then what was the cost of living? Because I got to thinking, okay, our cost of living now is really high, but in comparison to the cost of living now, what was the cost of living in 1938 when they had a minimum wage established of 25 cents an hour? And so I'm getting to the point of what would that 25 cents an hour pay for in 1938 versus our 725 we pay for here now in 2025. Like what the purchasing power, like getting to the point of the purchasing power of its time. The cost of living in 1938 was drastically lower than today in dollar terms. But keep in mind that people did earn far less with many modern expenses. And many modern expenses were minimal and non-existent, like healthcare, internet, widespread car ownership, things like that. People just, there wasn't that many people. There wasn't even much home ownership. Most things were just rented or whatever the case. So here, like I said, housing average home price was $3,900. Average monthly rent was $27. $27. Wow. Most people lived in small homes, often without modern installations or amenities. Home ownership was far less common. Food prices: a loaf of bread, 9 cents. Pound of milk, 50 cents. Dozen eggs, 36 cents. Pound of ground beef, 30 cents. Eggs were more expensive than a pound of ground beef. Milk was more expensive. Transportation: new car, $760 on average, I'm guessing. A gallon of gas was 10 cents. Most families didn't own multiple cars, and some still didn't own one at all. And then it breaks down like even clothing: men's shirts, $1.50, women's dress, $3 to $5. Clothing was more expensive relative to wages, but people bought fewer items overall and expected them to last. So they wore shit till it was, falling off of them. They weren't quite as, bombastic as we are with buying clothing and expensive shoes like, Jordans and shit. But whatever. Healthcare: doctor visit, $2 to $4. Hospital stay, $5 to $10 per day. Medical technology was basic and health insurance wasn't widespread. Education: college tuition, $200 to $400 at a private college per year. Public college were often cheaper or free for in-state residents. So the summary here is most essentials were very cheap in dollar terms. Average income was $1,730 a year, or about $33 a week. So even a $3,900 house cost more than 2 years' salary. But I got to thinking about that. Okay, so the one thing that I did not ask, and I actually was going to ask it at this point, but I didn't, because I got to thinking, what is the average, like, I think the average income, medium income right now is somewhere around 30 to 40,000. If I'm not mistaken, maybe it's 50. It's just, even if we just say it's 50, the median house, the cost of a house is like what? Like 250 to 100,000. So even if you look at it that way, this is just a little bit more than 2 years worth of salary. But now it's like 4 or 5 times, like 4 to 5 years salary to purchase a house. So even there, you looking like you think, holy shit, that's a big difference, right? The cost of living. So then I said, okay, explain the purchasing power of the minimum wage in 1938 versus the minimum wage now. Like, give me a breakdown. Like, you tell me, what is the power difference? Like, give me some more details, some more comparisons. So basically, I said minimum wage in 1938. Beginning, it's telling me, the 25 cents versus the 7. Purchasing power comparison. 1938, $25 an hour could buy more relative basic needs at the time. A full-time worker earning $10 a week was $520 a year. That would cover rent, which was $25 to $30 a month, food, clothing, basic medical needs, whatnot. A single worker earned minimum wage could often survive without government assistance. though frugally. Okay, you had to be a little frugal, but you could live and survive without government assistance. A single worker. Okay. In 2025, though, $7.25 an hour is nominally higher, but much less powerful. A full-time worker earns $290 a week or $15,080 a year before taxes. Okay, that's a key thing. In most U.S. cities, that's below the poverty line for a single adult, and nowhere near enough to cover rent, which is often 1,000 plus, healthcare, insurance, food, transportation, and so on. Real wage decline. Listen to this. In 1968, the minimum wage was $1.60 an hour, which is about $14.50 today, which is double the current minimum wage. In 1968, remember that? $1.60 an hour equals $14.50. That shows how much a purchasing power somebody had, even making minimum wage in 1968. $14.50 an hour would be livable here in Mississippi right now. $14.50. Although it would not be in many other places. Mississippi is one of the lowest, cost of living states in the country. Conclusion. While today's nominal minimum wage is higher, its real purchasing power is significantly lower than in 1938, and especially compared to its peak years in 1968. Today, minimum wage workers struggle to afford even the most basic living expenses, making the current wage largely inefficient without external support. Okay, so without assistance. So then I got to thinking, okay, what about this poverty thing, this poverty argument? So because we always are looking at, we're trying to keep people out of poverty. This, talking about below poverty line for single adults. I'm like, what is that? Let's get on the poverty line wage. I said, what is the current poverty wage? The current poverty wage depends on how you define it, but generally it refers to the hourly wage a person must earn to reach the federal poverty line. So the federal poverty line, which is an HHS guideline, one person is $15,060 for one person in a household. That's the poverty line. Annual income. Okay. Well, poverty wage calculation, $40 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year is 2,080 hours a year. So that, if you divide that by the poverty line, 724. Oh, well, that's interesting. So the federal minimum wage of $7.25 is just barely above the poverty line for a single person. So then I thought, okay. So is this the reason why there's constant argument that, well, $7.25 is fine because $7.25 will keep you above the poverty line? And that's all we're concerned with. Because remember up here, when we stated the idea behind the minimum wage was to prevent poverty, right? So then I thought, okay, well, how is it, what do we, and it breaks it down for a three person and whatnot. These are bare minimum survival numbers, but that not what it takes to live comfortably or safely. The living wage in many U.S. cities is $18 to $25 an hour or more. Many argue the poverty line is outdated and doesn't reflect modern cost of living, which includes housing, child care, healthcare. And I got to think, okay, wait a minute. what does the poverty line, like, when was it established, and like what does it include? Like, why, what does the poverty line mean? Like, where did they get that 1560? So I asked it a question. I said, when we, well, this was badly stated. Current poverty line established, and it said, well, the current poverty line was established in 1963 to 1964 by Molly Orshansky, economist working for the Social Security Administration. Created the first official poverty threshold. She based, listen to this, based it on the cost of minimal food diet, which is called the Economic Food Plan. Multiply by 3, because at that time the average family spent about 1/3 of its income on food. So if the minimum food budget was $1,000 a year, the poverty threshold would be set to $3,000. And the reason why, and this will get answered here in a minute. Okay, let me just continue. So, and they've been updating this based on inflation. So they've taken this base. The poverty line is solely based around food diet. Because at the time, families spent 1/3 of their income on food. Here's the criticism. It doesn't account for modern expenses like housing, which now takes up more than 1/3 of income, healthcare, childcare, regional cost differences. And see, childcare is more important now because, I mean, it's gotten to where one person in a household cannot maintain the living for the household. So you have to have both parents working in order to even remotely try to, maintain income needed for living. So therefore, somebody's got to take care of a child if you've got a child. It assumes food is still the biggest cost, which it no longer is. The poverty line was established assuming that the biggest cost to any individual at that time was food. And that was all it was based on. So many researchers believe that the poverty line dramatically understates true economic hardship because it isn't including what now, in today's terms, in today's living, is the more expensive things, or the things that, go against our incomes. And here's some alternatives. Supplementary poverty measure, which includes housing, utilities, and regional cost variations. And then, of course, the living wage calculator, which we know includes, all the stuff we previously talked about with the minimum wage. Where was that? Housing, food, transportation, and healthcare. So I thought, okay, well then, what I want to know, okay, I asked, when was the last time that it was adjusted? Well, it kind of already answered me because I didn't read everything. So, it's like, it tells me again that it's adjusted by the consumer price. And I was like, okay, well, I'm stupid. I should have paid more attention to what you told me. But it's still saying that the method is being, argued. I said, okay, well then, if these alternatives, I went back and I actually read the alternatives because I skipped over them the first time. But I said, if these alternatives were put in place, if these were the way that poverty was, or the poverty line was established, what difference would that be to the current way poverty line is established, right? So I asked it, I said, if we use the SPM or the living wage calculation to determine the poverty line, what would it be? It said, great question. If we replace the outdated official poverty line with a more realistic benchmark like the SPM or the living wage calculator, the poverty threshold would be significantly higher. And then here it shows and breaks down how. What is it? Developed by the U.S. Census Bureau in 2010. Out-of-pocket expenses like housing, utilities, medical costs, taxes, work expenses, childcare, government aid like SNAP housing subsidies to offset costs, adjustments for regional cost differences, especially housing. Here's the breakdown. For one adult, the official poverty line is 14,580. This was in 2023, so keep that in mind. It is higher now, so even this number would be higher now. 14,5080 in 2003. If we went by SPM, it would be 21,000 in 2003. The SPM threshold is about 40 to 50% higher than the official line. So if we went by a more accurate modern idea of expenses on the normal household, single person or with, adults and children and whatnot, the SPM would prove to be higher. So there were 2 adults, 2 children, the poverty line is 30,000. With SPM, it's 35 to 39,000. Okay, so that probably includes in the fact that you are getting some government aid potentially with SNAP or household subsidies and whatnot, so it's not quite as high. But then let's go on to living wage. Estimating the minimum income needed to meet basic needs, housing, food, childcare, transportation, healthcare, and taxes, assumes, because this is the big difference between this and this, assumes no government assistance. Okay? So in other words, a living wage that would prevent you from the necessity of having government assistance. And of course, varied by location, but more realistic than the federal poverty line. National average, a single adult, 34,000. 34,000. National average. San Francisco would be 44,000 for a single adult. Mississippi rural, where I am, 29,000. So this is assuming to prevent me from needing any government assistance and based on living wage calculation to keep me out of poverty in my current location, I would need 29,000. Versus right now in 2025, the poverty line is 15,000. So double, twice the amount. And 15 is the average. 15 is the national average. So 34 is the national average for single. So over twice the amount for living wage with no government assistance for a single person. 1 adult, 1 child, 57. 2 adults, 1 working, plus 2 kids, 78,000. That's a huge difference from this right here, isn't it? So living with no assistance, living 2 adults, you're talking about the cost of food, the cost of living for the and 2 children for the size house you would need to live with 4 people, the cost of food, the cost of potential child care. Well, 1 working, so I guess maybe it's arguing even here whether or not child care is involved. I don't know. But, just the cost of paying for a child, whether even if it's going to school or, clothing, all the necessities that we would need, the health care, taxes, transportation, the cars you live or did you buy, gas, all this stuff, taking the kids to the doctor, It gets sick, right? You get sick. I mean, think about that. So, a realistic poverty line based on actual cost of living would likely range from 30,000 to 40,000, 45,000 for a single adult, double to triple the current official line. So, here's the breakdown. Official 1560, SPM is 21, which is actually low because that's based on 2023, and the living wage is 34,000. So that just shows you that, and if we broke this down, to say, okay, well then national average is 34, right? So if we did a calculator and we said that, because what was it up here? The calculation that it was giving. Right, the average household, 2,080 hours, right? So if we are now saying, okay, well, the poverty line is 34,000 national average divided by 2,080, that puts us at 1635, if you round it up. So the national average to prevent or to keep someone over poverty line based on living wage, which assumes, again, no government assistance, Republicans, 1635 should be the national average. And we're only in the bill that's being pushed through is only for 15. And this is for a full-time worker. It should be 1634. Now, here in Mississippi, it'd be 29,000, right? Divided by 2080, right? Is that what the number was, I think? So it'd be 1394. It said a minute ago 14 something. So that's roughly, 14 something would be about. And you wonder why they argue that a living wage needs to be, ranging from right here, $14.50 to over $25 an hour, depending upon location. Now, the federal is like a national average base, right? That's the reason why it's even being asked for 15. But even then, 15 is not enough. 15 is lower than what it should be. It should be 1635. Let's just round that up and say 1650. But that would keep people above the poverty line, or what should be the poverty line in relation to modern living and what we pay out more on, because it's no longer food. The poverty line previously was about food. A third of our income was paid on food, but now food is not the most expensive cost. It's housing, it's childcare, it's transportation, things like that. Food is not. While food is still, in some regards expensive, it's not as expensive as these other things. So when this guy here says, well, some wages are not designed to be livable wages. And I can only assume he's saying that the minimum wage is not supposed to be a livable wage. But as we've already discussed, according to the one who established it in the beginning, if a business is paying less than livable wages, they have no right to continue in this country. And then we broke down and explained the difference in the cost of when it was established versus the cost now, and the purchasing power from that moment to now is lower. It peaked in 1968 when, in comparison today, minimum wage would be $14.50. But again, that's only based in inflation and doesn't include the idea, cost of living. It's just solely a broad barrage of inflation, the cost increases on products, but it doesn't include, a house is not considered a product. That's a combination of products, or when you actually start looking at cost of living, even in 1938, cost of living was not as high as it is now, as I clearly showed, even in the purchasing power of what you made versus the cost of a home. A little over 2 years worth of income, where now, on average, I mean, hell, I can even ask that. Uh, Average U.S. income. All right. Median income is 48,000. Mean average individual income is 66. Median household 75. Average household is 105. So even an average is like including everybody's. So that's probably not even fair to use. I assume a median is probably more fair, but okay. Average cost for probably supposed to be median cost, but let's just say for house. National average is 420. Median home is 395. New home, existing home. So if you're looking at, again, calculator time, we're looking at, let's say, let's take median, 48,000. Median, 395. 395 divided by 48,000. 8 years. 8 years. For median home. Even if you do actual means average, 420 and 66. 420 divided by 66. Still 6. 6. So it just shows you, just in housing alone, we're not talking about cars, which are much more prominent now than they were there, and the cost of the cars versus the cost in, or, food, or any of these other things, clothing, whatnot, just housing. The average in 1938 took you a little over 2 years from your income versus the cost of a house to pay for it. Now you're looking at from 6 to 8 years. 6 to 8 years. Now, okay, let me clarify something. Let me clean this up a little bit, or make sure of something. Because I'm gonna try to give you an out here. Okay, I'm gonna try to give you an out here. Because let's argue, because someone's probably gonna say, well, this average income of 1,000, 730, would be like the household average, right? Okay, all right. Let's say that. Let's say that is the case. All right. So national average is 420. 420, and the national or the average household income is 105. So divide it by 105. 4 years. So still today, it's almost twice as long, twice as much to pay for a house alone. And on a median, we're looking at, what is it, $395 divided by 75. 5 years. So if you're one of those and be like, well, okay, with that average, maybe the whole household, I'll grant you that. But still, a little over 2 years versus still today, 4 to 5 years. So more than double, or just say double, twice as much. It's twice as expensive just for a home alone today versus when the minimum wage was established in 1938. And in 1938, the minimum wage had more purchasing power than our minimum wage does now. So I hope this gives a better understanding when people when this generation today, when my generation, when the younger generation says, hey, older generation, yeah, our wages are not where they need to be. Our wages are not helping us pay and have a living, comfortably, or even living like over the without poverty, living without assistance, living with, like, it's not doing it. That's why. Everything that I just went over is why. Is why that everybody should be trying to push for wages to increase. And there should still be, even today, from the in and I understand that a lot of people were like, no, but we just don't want the federal government to have that control. We don't want them to establish a baseline. But understand the federal government, anything that the federal government does is supposed to be in check of the states and making sure that the states aren't doing things irrationally towards its citizens. That's what the federal government is supposed to handle and be there for. That's the point of the federal minimum wage, is to make sure that any given state, any different policy, any different company in that state cannot take advantage of its workers or its workforce, paying them lower wages than they should be paid. And it should reach the average national at the very least. Now, yes, that would create the ability for like somewhere like Mississippi for somebody to get a minimum wage that actually helps them out. And in California, it wouldn't be enough. But you have places like that have already established that, and that's the reason why places like California are more left leaning and understand that situation, so they already pay their workers more. They have state laws and stuff that force workers to be paid more. But that's a way that that state maintains, and the federal government going at a national average would help lower states like Mississippi actually raise our means, which would be beneficial to the whole country. Anywhere, any location that you were able to raise the means of that location would help the economy, would help the country as a whole. Now, some might argue that would be unfair, and I get your argument. I understand, but understand that raising anybody's level, okay, helps everybody. When you raise the bottom, you raise everybody. And it helps everybody. Anyways, this has been a long video, but there was a lot that I wanted to go over with that and kind of just break down why the argument to keep the minimum wage down, the argument that it's not a living wage and that it's not what it's supposed to be for, that's bullshit. It was originally for just that, for being a living wage to keep people from poverty. And the problem now, and the argument now, is that the current one prevents that. But that's because the poverty line metrics do not equate to today's living, like how people live today versus when it was established in 1963, and what cost the most. The metrics need to change. I would even argue that in 1963, the poverty line was probably not high enough by those metrics. But they certainly, at this point, need to change. So then the argument for the 725 most certainly then can go away, because it does not allow for anybody to have a living wage. And that's what the minimum wage was supposed to be for. Thank you very much for joining me. Let me know in the comments what you think about all of this, what you think about the minimum wage, what you think about the poverty line, and how we figure all this up and connect this to that, and and what do you think the national federal minimum income should be, or wage should be? Let me know in the comments, and until next time, peace. Clear Talk, I am out.